we're worried about our residents if we do end up getting COVID.
We really do treat them like our family and we don't want anything to happen to them, and we're trying our hardest to stop that from happening.
Breakfast time at Rashilee Care Home. Everyone gets a temperature check and a blast of upbeat music. They're doing whatever they can to buffer the most vulnerable from the virus raging outside. Inside, they've filmed themselves, just for Channel 4 News.
Thank you. You remember we've got the isolation because of the COVID-19?
Since family visits stopped 16 days ago, the job has changed. These are carers in every sense of the word.
Hi Mary. Is it alright if I have a wee chat with you?
Yes.
How are we?
Miserable at the moment.
How come?
Where possible, they explain to Mary and the 4 in 5 residents here who have dementia what on earth is going on.
You know how yesterday we were talking about the virus that's going about just now and that's stopping visitors coming in?
Do you know, I don't think I remember that.
No, there's a virus going about at the moment and we're not allowed to accept any visitors into the home just to reduce the chances of us getting it.
Of course.
You know?
The longer this goes on, we hear these measures could be in place for many months. What sort of effect will that have on your residents?
I think it'll have a great effect on the residents. People naturally are sociable. They're used to seeing their families, they're used to interacting with other people on a daily basis and getting out into the community here. Residents themselves, there's a high risk we're going to get people that are turning their faces to the wall, that are going to get depressed. We really do treat them like our family and we don't want anything to happen to them.
How are you today?
Very tired.
You're very tired?
Myra has returned from hip surgery in hospital. She has no symptoms, but is spending 14 days in her room as a precaution.
How does that make you feel?
That's not very pleasant.
No.
I can tell you.
Yeah, you miss coming round and seeing everybody.
Absolutely.
Every day here is a strain to keep the virus at bay and to keep spirits high. We're all being told to keep our distance from one another. Is that possible in your environment?
We're struggling. In this environment, it's very hard when you have people living with dementia. The spatial awareness is not there. So, you know, there's residents that will come up in the morning and want to hug you or, you know, be right beside you. And to distance yourself from them would cause a lot of stress and distress for them that it would be very unfair.
There is fear, too, that the virus will find its way here, faster than supplies of protective equipment from the authorities. Although the Scottish Government says from today it's improved its distribution of PPE and sourcing more is an absolute priority. Do you have everything you need?
I would say that we need masks. Having enough masks for one person is not good enough. The current method of sourcing these at the moment from social care is basically that we have to wait until we've got a confirmed case before our suspected case, and then we have to phone them up and then they'll get them to us. That's not good enough. We need to have them in the care homes ready for that to happen.
So they control what they can.
Good morning. How are you? It's lovely to see you instead of on the phone.
That means 95-year-old Jessie has been seeing her daughter over video link until they were briefly reunited today.
The impression I have all the time is that she's fine, she's really happy, and we actually see this because of the videos and the films that the home are putting on.
What would you like to say to the people who are in there caring for your mum day and night?
Thank you. Really, really thank you. We're so grateful to them. Sorry. It's really tough, that.
How do you feel about your role in this crisis? You're classed as very much a critical worker. What you're doing is so important.
I'm proud, really proud. Really proud that I'm making a difference. Really proud that I'm helping people.
Should it have taken something like this for people to appreciate what you're doing every day?
No, it should have been known before.
The protective equipment, they say, can't come soon enough. But what they do have are reserves of resolve to keep these residents happy. and safe.
Lovely to see you again.
Kieran Jenkins reporting there. Now, the trauma of losing loved ones, the struggle to say goodbye in the age of coronavirus, an experience which is sadly becoming all too common across the UK and throughout the rest of the world. Pat Midgley died of the COVID-19 virus in hospital in Sheffield yesterday. Despite being 82, she was still active as a Labour councillor in the city. She and her husband had celebrated their 60th wedding anniversary just last year. Earlier, I spoke to her daughter, Joanna Midgley, and I began by asking her how suddenly the illness came on.
Like most people, we thought this was happening to others and not to us. And suddenly we were plunged into it. 2 weeks ago, she was at a meeting in the community and she'd been really busy and active up until that point. She then got a few symptoms and gradually became more unwell and was admitted to hospital last Tuesday.
And how difficult was it at that point to get in to see her in hospital?
But it was very worrying because obviously we couldn't get in touch with her and we couldn't go and see her. It was only on Friday that we were offered the chance to visit her, and that's when she deteriorated, and I think they realised that she wasn't going to make it.
And how difficult was it for you going to see her on the COVID ward?
I had to wear full PPE, so I had a gown, gloves, mask. And that was quite difficult, obviously, you know, because it's difficult to talk to somebody when you're dressed like that.
I mean, just when you're having to wear all the gowns and the masks, as you described, your instinct must have been to try and hug your mum, but presumably you just couldn't do any of that.
No, it's really, really difficult. And, you know, this is a completely different way of people ending their lives. It's not what we're used to. It's not what we want for our families, but and it kind of, you know, it doesn't feel right that's the way that people die, but it's the way it is at the minute.
How are you coping with that?
I mean, I'm lucky because I got to see her, but my brothers and my dad and other family members didn't. And I know a huge circle of friends as well. They all feel really bad that they weren't able to see her in the last couple of weeks before she died. And I know we're not the only people affected like that. It's affecting thousands of people across the world. Everyone's got their own stories and their own different circumstances, but it does make you feel very guilty, and you know, I don't think we'll get over that very easily because it wasn't the goodbye that we wanted to give her.
And I know this is really hard to talk about, but given that funerals are restricted at the moment, have you thought about how you're going to be saying your goodbyes to your mum?
We haven't really thought about that just yet. I mean, I know they're restricted, and I think because my mum was so well known and well liked that we probably will have some kind of memorial service later on when hopefully all of this is over, when people can get together and share their memories of her.
How would you like to remember your mum?
Well, my mum was a force of nature. She was amazing, and she did so much for the community and for the city of Sheffield in her 33 years as a councillor. Despite it being such a difficult end to her life, that the staff at the hospital at the Northern General were just amazing, and I can't thank them enough for letting me get in to see her. They're working in such difficult circumstances, and they were so kind and lovely too, and she really impressed that on me when I went to visit her, that they were being really kind to her. And just before she died, they allowed us to take some cards and messages from other family members, and they read them out to her just about 2 minutes before she died, so that's really comforting. And I just want to say that they're absolute heroes. Everyone that's working in the NHS at the minute is a hero.
I'm sure they'd really appreciate hearing that. I just wonder what your message was to other people who, you know, may be worried about family members with coronavirus. What do you say to them at this point?
From my experience with the staff that we encountered, I would say that your family members are in good hands, but I would also say that I would urge everybody to really treat this disease seriously and to follow the guidelines of social distancing, to follow the guidelines of self-isolation. I'm now self-isolating for 14 days, which is really difficult because at a time of bereavement, I want to be with my family and friends, and I can't. I've got to be on my own. And I think that's an implication that maybe people don't think about as well. But really just follow the guidelines, because we've got to save the pressure that on the NHS so that they can care for the people that they need to care for.
Joanna Midgley, thank you so much for joining us at this really difficult time for you. Really sorry for your loss. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now, millions of people aged 70 and above have been told to self-isolate for at least 3 months. But what about those who live in multi-generational households? It's a particularly tricky issue for Asian communities where 80% of those aged over 70 live with extended families. Our Home Affairs correspondent Dashna Soni has this report.
I got 3 children and my wife, and we both work at NHS, and my mother-in-law, she's housebound.
Dr. Haider Abbas and his children have always enjoyed living in an extended family. But in the current crisis, it's become a huge source of stress.
I think every family at the moment is stressed out, especially in the Asian culture. You know, as you probably know, aware, we have a kind of religious and, you know, customs and also the cultural responsibility that we have to look after our elderly parents. I have many friends, they are health professionals, and they have to go back to every day to live with their elderly parents.
His mother-in-law, Nahid Fatima, is 80 and like many her age has underlying health conditions. He and his wife both go out to work for the NHS every day, and the whole family worry about the potential risks.
It's quite worrying to see that, you know, she's quite, obviously Dad says she's quite vulnerable, so there's always worry, like if she does catch it, then that's a problem, and it's just quite worrying, to be honest.
Dr. Abbas's practice is in Oldham. Here, as in other areas with large Asian populations, it's common to see 3 or 4 generations living together under one roof.
If you're white and you're aged over 70, then statistically you're unlikely to live with your children or grandchildren. But if you're Asian and you're aged over 70, then it's unlikely that you don't live with them. 80% of the over 70s within Asian communities live in multi-generational households. And that can mean that following the government advice on self-isolating can feel almost impossible.
For families who live together for economic as well as cultural reasons, it can be especially difficult.
I have a few patients, they are housebound, are the end of life, they are palliative care patients, and they're living with extended families.
As he showed me around the area served by his practice, Dr. Abbas told me few of his patients will have the luxury of being able to afford to have separate rooms or the space to distance themselves.
They have a big Asian population and highly populated, overcrowded place, and they are mainly historically, you know, it's a socially deprived area. Most of the houses are here like 2 to 3 bedroom houses where about 10 to 12 people could be living in one house, which is quite overcrowded places. It can be a very high risk for the family to spread the coronavirus.
Health professionals fear that tight-knit Muslim communities are particularly at risk of the disease. Social practices of eating, praying and living together can make them vulnerable. As the doctor showed me around, a stark reminder of just how vulnerable. We were approached by a man who had lost his grandfather to the virus.
It's devastating for all the family. It was quite shocking to us all to hear that it was coronavirus, and we don't know where he's got it from, who he's been in contact with.
His cousin is also now critically ill in hospital.
Reduced his oxygen levels today. We had to wake him back up again because they put him into an induced coma.
Many here are all too aware of the suggestion that one reason Italy was struck so hard because they too have a high proportion of elderly residents living with extended family. There are no specific guidelines here for multi-generational households. Health professionals say there should be. Their message tonight that these families need to try and take extra care.